I'm Lorenzo Perri. I'm Italian. I live in London. I moved here in 2013 after having studied architecture in Italy. And then I moved to be here at the Architectural Association where I met Sabrina. And in 2016, after having graduated together, we founded Lemonot, a sort of, I wouldn't say a practice, more a duo to where we're trying to combine spatial and relational practices. And after that, like, we have been working and living in multiple places around the world, and now we're back in London since a few years ago and living in between here and Italy. Before moving to London, I had quite a conventional architectural training in Italy. So before, I actually started studying engineering in Pisa, and then I moved to architecture in Florence, and then I came in here. So I would say I have this quite conventional training. So, I mean, I like architecture also in the most conventional sense of the term, but what I like to do most is to use it as a medium. So to somehow use this conventional training and the languages, the skills, the tools that it gives you to approach multiple things. Sometimes with Sabrina and Lemonot, we always say that architecture is never the beginning or the end of our projects, our stories, but it's always a sort of framework to grasp reality, a sort of filter. We think through space. We don't necessarily end up with doing spaces, but we really need architecture to trigger ideas, actually, I would say. Right after having graduated from the AA, when you start approaching the profession, when you start understanding what you want to do, if you want to work in offices, if you want to, which kind of commissions you want to get, which kind of competitions you want to approach, and then you realize that perhaps you are not so interested in architecture as a final outcome, but still you do love it and you do need it, and you're somehow skilled in that. And so that's why you start approaching things that at first they seem to have nothing to do with that, but then you realize that again, your training or your thinking processes, somehow this idea of thinking through space can lead you in multiple places, can lead you in the exploration of multiple paths. Somehow if something can be, let's say, explained spatially, then it deals with space. And we live we experience spaces every day on a daily basis, and sometimes even unconsciously. So we found ourselves dealing with spaces, and even a lot of people that are not trained as architects, actually they have this sort of constant dealing with spaces, and it's very nice to somehow try to stimulate that. I feel it's always very nice when we do projects trying to engage with audiences that are not, let's say, within the discipline. So even when we do projects that are more architectural, it's always super nice to understand how they are received by audiences that have nothing to do with our discipline. So somehow using really architecture as an interface. And I mean, at the end of the day, it's also about, I feel that sometimes only us as architects, we're obsessed with this idea, is it architecture? And at the end of the day, does it really matter? We think through architecture, but then what we do, I feel it doesn't really matter if it's architecture or not. I feel it's more a personal way of approaching things, and then it doesn't matter what we end up doing. We do things that we believe in, we do things that perhaps we're skilled for, and we do things that we believe can be interesting for bigger audiences. Moving to a city when you are 18 or when you are 23, 24 is completely different. I mean, I have a relationship with London which is truly hate and love. This is a place that I truly miss when I'm not here for a few months, but then really I cannot stay here. I feel more than 2-3 months in a row. I really need to escape, and I feel that I'm somehow really attached to Italy. I come from a very small town in Tuscany, and I have a very strong group of friends in there. Then at some point we were all scattered in different places in the world, and now most of them, they're back in there. And so it's a place that I'm very attached to. I would say that a lot of things, lot of, let's say, behaviors or feelings or let's say things that characterize my way of approaching reality are grounded in there. So I would say I could never be back permanently in Italy, but it's also a place that I really need to have a close relationship with, and where I need to go quite often. For example, when we were living in South America or when we were living in Thailand, one of the perhaps the biggest reason for me to be back at some point was that I couldn't go as often as I wanted, for example, back to my hometown. So in that sense, I would say that London feels home, but perhaps let's say my origins should be really tracked back to Italy and to Tuscany and to my hometown.
What
It's actually very close to Florence. It's a small town, but I wouldn't say. Perhaps you're right. Like the word hometown is not the right one because like it's Prato, this small town close to Florence. But I wouldn't say like it's the city itself, the town itself. But it's more like the area, the regions. Like it's really about like a lot of things that you can find in there, from the landscape, from like the ways of using public space, from like the food, from like a lot of things that of course like you can find them in here as well, but still they're different. Like all those things that are, for example, surrounding like your professional life, but that they end up being like very important, even like for your way of working as well. You know, like this place comes actually with a big legacy. No, it's a very famous school. It's very prestigious. A lot of interesting people have studied in here, and they are still studying and teaching in here. But like the truth is, like when I decided to study here, I didn't know anything about the place. I remember I was like a first year or a second year student in architecture in Florence, and then I happened to be in London, and I happened to be at a party in here at the A. Most likely, actually we tracked this back, most likely it was organized by Sabrina, that it was like she was the head of the student forum at the time, but still we didn't know each other. But I happened to be in this building, and I really literally fell in love with the building itself. So let's say the building and like its spaces, they came first, and then of course then I went home, I did my research, and then I understood that it was actually a place where I could try to develop my identity, where I could try to develop like different ways of expressing myself, again through spaces. But literally the building and the fascination with the building, it was the first thing, and it was the thing that really sparked. When I was at the high school, I have been studying classical piano for several years, and I feel that those studies and my tutor at the time, Alessandro Cavicchi, were quite influential. It's like I feel that the way of, I couldn't even describe it through words, but like I often feel that when I design something, like somehow the way I try to put things together, it owes a lot to the way like you need to read music, you need to compose music, like some of like the dynamics, some of the intersections that I'm aiming for when I design a piece of architecture, when I design an object, when I design a performance, are really grounded in that super complicated, sometimes too complicated, but also like very intuitive, very evocative system that characterizes the production of music. And then after that, I would say, like before coming to the AA, I worked for a bit in an office in Tuscany, and that I'm still in touch with. And in there, like I would say that like few people in that office that are leading that office can be considered my mentors, or like people that were really, again, like quite influential, like for my architectural training. But not only for that, like there are people that I consider friends right now, that are people that I'm always in touch with when I do things, when I somehow, like, you know, like when you do something that you're proud of, and like you send a WhatsApp message to something, like you have like few people that are always the first. And then of course, like even here at the AA, I had like very, very important tutors that like I also, like, similarly to Sabrina, I would say that Sabrina now, as she said, like that she's teaching at the foundation with Saskia, that she was like her first tutor at the Architectural Association in the foundation. Now, I actually stopped few months ago, but like for several years after South America and Thailand, for 3 years, I was teaching in Vienna with Cristina Diaz Moreno and Efrain Garcia Grinda, and they used to be my tutors in here in the diploma for both years. And again, like I would say that like the way I'm doing like a lot of things owes quite a lot to what I learned with them, not only as a student, but really also like as a colleague, or I would say as a friend. Let's say Lemonot is a sort of, we wanted a word that like didn't indicate an architectural studio, or that could, let's say, indicate multiple things, so that was, let's say, ambiguous on purpose. And we wanted somehow like to have a word that hinted to what it's not. We always like have difficulties in defining who we are, what we do, but we like to do multiple things, like so many things. Like we have like tons of interest, and I mean, I know it seems like a sentence that everyone says, but like we really like, we're, I would say, like overwhelming people sometimes, like the way we speak, the way we engage with things. So it's really easy for us sometimes like it's easier to say what we're not. So in that sense, like, and the word sounded quite nicely, I would say. With Sabrina, we have a rule, like we are a duo, but like since we are a couple as well, we try to not do projects without the help of someone else, without collaborating with someone else. We always try like to construct projects at least as a trio. So that means like the two of us plus someone else. And usually like we hope to find and we aim to find different professionals, like different creatives that can bring within the practice something like quite different from like the usual conversations that we have. Because again, like especially like when you practice as a couple, so when you spend like a lot of time together, like not only like for your work, but also for your leisure. And we know that in architecture, the boundary between like your passions, your interests and the work are very thin. So sometimes like conversations, they run the risk of being a bit incestuous, a bit like self-referential. So bringing someone external, it helps quite a lot. And like we try to work as much as possible, like with filmmakers, with performers, with actors. We recently did a project that we are really proud of for the Biennale, with Roberto Flore, who's a great guy that works in the realm of food systems in Copenhagen. And for example, like working with him, that like it was very great because like we realized how we are coming from very different worlds. So we have like, for example, different approaches like to research or like to somehow the way of like somehow conceiving like and cultivating certain ideas, but also we realized how perhaps even unconsciously or spontaneously we are aligned when it comes to, I don't know, like material sensitivity, or when it comes to addressing, let's say, some intellectual sides of the project. And for us, like, it's always like quite a resource, again, like to bring someone external, like within the practice. Really, really, it's kind of an unwritten rule, or perhaps even written at some point, perhaps like we put it in paper, that we are a duo, but we never do projects alone as a duo. I started teaching, I mean, I don't even remember when I started. I feel that I tried to start as soon as possible. Even before coming at the AAE, I was teaching as assistant professor in Florence in first years when I was like completing like my bachelor, and then in here right after having graduated. But even in here when I was doing diploma, I actually was like conducting some workshops in intermediate with Maria Fedorchenko, who's another tutor in here that was like quite influential for my development, my creative development. But like, so I mean, and after the A, yes, I started doing summer school with Sabrina, and then after that we moved to South America, to Bolivia, when we were doing the visiting schools, and then after that in Thailand, where we had like the opportunity of teaching like in multiple years, from first years to master. And then in there, I realized that, for example, I like a lot teaching to master students because I feel they are like quite close to me. We're still quite young, so we graduated not long ago. It's just 7-8 years ago. So we feel quite close to them, and we really feel that we can learn a lot from them. So for example, in our studio at the RCA, which is about convivialism, we tried to conceive like really tailored, bespoke project, keeping the brief quite loose on purpose, giving them a conceptual umbrella, but then trying to understand from them, for example, their interpretation on conviviality, and trying to develop like project that could be really tailored on their interests, on their skills, on like their willingness to learn certain things, and their capability of transmitting us like those things that they were trying to learn. But even in the teaching, for example, we try to bring within the studio as many people as possible. We are obsessed like with doing as many juries as possible, and sometimes like students hate us for that, but we are also obsessed in trying to do like as many lectures as possible, because like we really believe that inputs shouldn't only come from us, because like of course like in the studio we push an agenda that is like quite aligned with what we're trying to do with Lemonot, but like the last thing that we would like is to have like, let's say, replicas of the projects that we're doing in Lemonot. Like we wouldn't like students to do things that we do. We would like them to investigate topics that we are interested in, but we would like them also to challenge and to augment these topics, bringing like, let's say, points of view that we would never think about, but also in terms of output, in terms of media. We really would like them to do things that we would never do. And like we believe that in order to do so, you need to bombard them like with a curated selection, of course, like curating it, but a curated selection of external inputs that are, for example, very different from things that we do with Lemonot. I have to say that this year we got very lucky because we got a very nice group of students. They had like a very nice group dynamic, especially between themselves, which I feel like it makes always like 70% of the unit. Because like I feel that more than like getting like individuals, when you have like people that are really able like to discuss things like, let's say, as a collective and to somehow construct like a collaborative environment which is not competitive and where they help each other like to push forward like ideas and projects, like is always good. And like you cannot say that like it depends a lot like on the units, it depends a lot on the group of students that you get, so it depends a lot like on contingencies. So for example, this year we had a very good experience, and I feel like that students, I mean, what's different, for example, from the AA and like the Bartlett is that like at the AA and the Bartlett in diploma, you get like most of the students that did the bachelor in there. So somehow they already have an idea of what the school is, what the school wants, what they want from the school, which on one hand is good. On the other hand, might come also with some prejudices or might come with some preconceptions. While at the RCA, you get people like coming in the fourth year, like from completely different places because there's not a bachelor in there. So somehow like for some of them might be harder, they might struggle at first to understand like how to behave and what to and how to work in the school. But on the other hand, again, they are like really fresh. They come like with really fresh approaches, and we felt that it's quite a place to experiment in terms of formats, in terms of let's say in terms of ideas. I mean, I wouldn't say like more than here or more than the Bartlett, but like I feel that like even the group of tutors which are teaching in there, we are more or less like the same age. Well, perhaps we're the youngest, but like again, I feel like we're all in between like 30 something and 40 something. So I feel we are all practitioners. We're all doing like a lot of things beside academia, and I feel that's quite a nice dynamic. Having an architectural department within a college of the arts, in my opinion, makes a lot of difference, because like you are next to people doing films, you are next to people doing ceramic, you are next to people doing glassworks, you are next to performers, but like not architects that are trying to approach those disciplines. You have like actually professionals that are working in those fields. So somehow the sort of like the interweaving perhaps like happens on a different level. And again, I'm not implying like better or worse, but like you are exposed perhaps to, let's say, a different degree of multidisciplinarity, just because like the proximity of these different disciplines like is bigger, is higher. They are in contact actually on a daily basis because they are just in the same building. So I would say what I don't know, maybe it's a very subjective personal point of view, but what I experienced in here at the AA as a student is also like that the school has like this strong legacy that sometimes can become a bit of a burden, because like sometimes you have like these studios that have such an established aesthetic and language. The students go there trying to work within that establishment. So somehow like there's a framework which is like built, established, formed, and you operate within it. Like it's amazing, it's very experimental, it's very broad, but still it's there. The RCA, I would say that again, since people are there just for 2 years, like there's a bit less of that. And there's a bit more like this idea of like really engaging with what surrounds it, which is on one hand like a lot of other departments which are like equally prestigious, perhaps even more prestigious than the architecture one. And like, I wouldn't say not more prestigious, but like perhaps like more established is a college of the arts with an architectural faculty inside. And then like the surrounding, London, as you said, like these ideas, like these like London like as a battleground, like as a big space that surrounds the school, I would say. I mean, I'm a bit more routinary than Sabrina in general. Like I have like certain things that I tend and like to do. I wouldn't say every day, but I would say often. I like a lot to walk and there are like certain paths in London that I like quite a lot. Like for example, we live like in North London, quite close to the Regent's Canal, and so there's a walk like from Kingsland Road and Aggerstone towards Cambridge Heath or Broadway Market, that like in the morning, if I see that the sun is up, and like lately it has been up more often than usual in London, like I really do that walk. Or for example, even like in my commuting to the RCA, like if I can, I tend to walk from Green Park to the Royal Albert Hall and to the South Kensington campus rather than taking the bus or the tube. Like there are, let's say, certain parts of London that like, I love the fact that London sometimes, like in the daily commuting, obliges you to, let's say, or give you the opportunity to do long walks, and like, which is something that, for example, in the small town where I come from is quite impossible, and I enjoy it quite a lot. I feel like that really somehow walking, like learning how to observe what happens around you, or even like walking without seeing anything, because like you just want to be like in your thoughts, and like you just want to, let's say, you want to use like what surrounds you almost like as an armor, as something like that protects you, and so that's why you don't want to do like a different route. You just want to go through the same one, because like it helps you like in just like thinking without like needing like to discover certain things. Like I feel like it could have like this dual usage that can help quite a lot. And I feel like, for example, deciding to walk quite slow in peak hours in the morning, where everything like is super fast in the city, and like for example, for me, it's something that I had to learn. Because like at first I really felt, which I think that a lot of people feeling it, especially when they move to London, that like you need to go as fast as the people that are next to you. And then at some point you realize, well, but why? I mean, not every day. There are like days where I need to, and there are like some other days where I can take it slowly. And so like in those days where like you can afford to do that, like somehow feeling that you're able to do that even if like people around you are going like that fast, I find it like, for example, very nice, like a very nice feeling. As a generation, I feel like our generation and like people slightly older and slightly younger than us, like in Italy, that like most often studied abroad or like did certain professional experiences abroad after the education, now are going back and are trying like to cultivate it. And I feel that there's a scene in Italy which is now developing, and which is like somehow also, I mean, increasingly a bit more recognized, but still I would say not much within the academia. I would say that like somehow like most of the people that came back to Italy and that are pushing like within the practice these alternative understandings of architecture, if they teach like us, they teach abroad, or they teach like in international schools in Italy. So it's very hard to penetrate the Italian academic system, and so like somehow like to show to students in the fourth, in the fifth year, what they could do and how they could use the amazing training that they're getting in school. Because again, architecture as a training is still amazing, as long as you understand that you can use it for a lot of different purposes. And again, like this idea of really trying how to develop your identity and to really trying how to do things that then you could do for real right after having graduated, it's something that, for example, going back to the conversation we were having before, that I see quite a lot at the RCA. Like people, especially in the fifth year, really trying to do stuff that can set up their practice. Really trying to do certain things that might be new and perhaps like hard to judge within an academic environment, even an open one, but that can be like really interesting in the real world. That kind of approach in Italy and foreignly in academia is missing quite a lot. And it would be quite an amazing combination, like together with, as you said, like the strong legacy, the masters, and that kind of like intellectual, theoretical, but even like formal burden that could be quite a resource. When I studied architecture, that it was 2008 in Italy, I feel it was like one of the, I mean, it was a boom, like really, I don't know, 50% of my friends were doing it. I don't know if right now is the same, or perhaps there are less and less people approaching it. Also because like now we all know that the profession is quite in a crisis. And again, like in a country where it's not that easy to practice then alternative forms of architecture, perhaps like people can be discouraged to do that. And again, like even this idea of like at some point having the option of teaching, and somehow even if you didn't have like a classical training, so even if you didn't have like teaching experience, if you didn't have a PhD, if you didn't start like working with a professor since years, that sometimes is not that bad, because like you bring within schools something fresh, something new, like you help to innovate certain things. In Italy it's not possible. Like it's very hard, even for us, for example, that now we have been teaching for several years. We are teaching like in good institutions. We're gathering like some interesting experiences. It would be impossible for us to teach in Italy. Like no one will hire us. Like we are not like within the system, so it would be like very hard to bring back again like these inputs. We can try to do that through the practice. We can try to do that like through foundations, museums, cultural events, but like directly within the academia, it's just not possible. My issue, like when you were talking about rejection, now when I was coming in here, my issue after like few years like in academia as a student in Italy, it was like that, like you have like a lot of situations where it seems that there's a right way of doing things and there's a wrong way of doing things, which in my opinion, like that kind of like dichotomy is very dangerous in architecture. Like this idea of like having a right solution and trying to look for the right solution is like, first of all, impossible. Secondly, like why? Like there are like several ways of doing like certain things, and like when you do something, no matter how great it is, you should be aware that like your way of doing that thing is one of the 1,000 ways that are existing. And then of course like, you need to ground it, you need to construct the logic, you need to anchor it to facts. Of course like, you cannot do things based on assumptions, but like you also have the duty, I guess, like as a tutor, as a professor, as a student, like to trust like certain intuitions, somehow to speculate in certain moments, like to really try to do things differently rather than like aiming like for the right thing that doesn't exist, or that like falls into the safest option, into shortcuts, into things that are not really helping like the academia to go forward. The good thing I would say to work with Sabrina is that we are very aligned for a lot of things, but we are also very different. So there are like certain projects that like are naturally led by her, or that are naturally led by me. So in a way, like I find it quite easy to have, let's say, my individuality recognized within the practice. Well, I wouldn't say perhaps recognized, meaning like I don't want it necessarily to emerge. I don't think like that this should be clearly visible or to others like in the final outcomes. Like I don't want it like to say, well, that project was led by Lorenzo, that project was led by Sabrina, but I feel that like we both know that happens. And so we don't struggle, at least like, or from my point of view, I don't struggle like in that sense. It's not that I can see myself in like the best projects are the ones actually where at the end we see really both of ourselves. But perhaps that doesn't mean that we led them together. Perhaps it means that like one of us led it because like it naturally happened, but then like again, working together, being together, there are like some natural inputs that are somehow being transferred every day, and so that are informing like the processes and the outputs. But I feel like it always like, I mean, if we want to put it like very simply, like there are certain things when they're like more performative, more related to the filming, like perhaps is always Sabrina that leads them, while when there are like some other things perhaps more related to geometry or to tectonics or to composition, perhaps I'm the one taking the lead. But again, like in both cases, like even if it's me growing, a piece of geometry, drawing a piece of architecture, drawing an object, the reference is on the table, which is an actual table. The one of our place is London, like we work from home, like is always like very, very shared. I mean, I might repeat what Sabrina said, but I have to say that I agree very much with her. Like, it's very hard to understand how, let's say, how to continue, let's say, certain projects that require, let's say, your presence, because like they were based on certain relational acts, they were based with the construction of a specific bond with people, with like, there could be workers, or it could be collaborators, or it could be audiences, and then at some point the project finishes, but then you know that you have like the duty of keeping it alive, but then like you are busy with different things, or perhaps like you are in a different part of the world, or like you're just doing something different because you want to do something different, and maybe you feel guilty because like you didn't, let's say, keep on feeding like certain traces. And like I would love to learn how to do that a bit more, let's say, naturally. I mean, I struggle sometimes in like, I'm this kind of person that trusts quite a lot his intuitions, but then I always need to construct very complicated frameworks and logics to push them forward. And I would love to learn how to do that like a bit more simply. And like that, this is not only like for, let's say, the things that we are doing or the things that we are designing, the project that we are doing in the present, but like also how to keep up with things that are concluded in a more, let's say, natural way, constructing like simple frameworks, simple systems that are almost like self, let's say, preserving themselves. I feel it's something that I would love, something that I found very difficult to learn, and something that I would love to learn. Perhaps like, yeah, it's the same thing. On our, let's say, way of dealing with relationships, even in personal life, we both struggle in leaving things behind. We both, and it could be about a place, it could be about a friend, it could be about an object. I really struggle to throw away old objects or things that are broken or things that are no longer useful. And perhaps like it's the same with projects. Like we really, the thing is like, again, even when it comes to build a piece of architecture, you know that like along the process you got in touch with like so many different actors, and like you constructed certain bonds because of that project, because of like that material, because of that like technical requirement. And then of course like these relationships, they seem to be over when the project is over, but like we really value them and we would really like to keep them alive. So I feel that again, like perhaps it's never about projects per se, but it's about like the whole set of like characters, the whole set of like moments, happenings that come with them that we don't want to leave behind. Perhaps like this idea of like keeping an eye on the project is more like an excuse to keep like certain memories alive. And I don't know, like perhaps it's even like sometimes it's a selfish act, because I realize that it's something that we do for ourselves, like that we are the ones attached to those moments and we don't want to leave them behind.